It's very, very historic, and it is by far even more than what Ethiopia is consuming. But by the time it is ready, I know agriculture is being propelled in Ethiopia on a massive level. But this will make sure that Ethiopia does not, and I repeat, does not import fertilizer anymore.
This is a Frick Vibe News, the voice that brings you what others won't dare to say. And today, Africa just made a move that Washington didn't see coming. Across the continent, from the plains of Tanzania to the savannas of Senegal, governments are quietly saying no more. No more chemical dependency, no more corporate control, and yes, no more U.S. fertilizer imports. This isn't just a trade issue. This is a revolution sprouting from the soil itself. Let's be clear, this ban didn't just happen overnight. It's been growing like a buried seed waiting for the right rain. For decades, American fertilizer giants names like Mosaic, Cargill, and Monsanto's successors dominated Africa's agriculture sector. They called it partnership. Africans called it control. Every year, billions of dollars flowed out of African economies into foreign corporations' pockets, while African farmers were told they couldn't grow food without American innovation. But the catch: those fertilizers depleted the soil, killed microbial life, and made African farmers forever dependent on foreign chemicals that had to be bought every single season. So, when Africa's ministers of agriculture met last month under the banner of the African Green Sovereignty Forum, something historic happened. Behind closed doors, one African leader stood up and said the words that changed everything: "We will not feed our children with foreign soil." Those words echoed across the room, and by the end of that meeting, several major African blocs agreed: a continental phase out of U.S. fertilizer imports. Washington didn't issue a press statement, not yet. But sources within trade circles are already calling it the most underestimated agricultural crisis since the oil embargo. Why? Because Africa is one of the largest emerging markets for agricultural products, worth over $70 billion in potential exports, and fertilizers? They're the lifeline of America's global agribusiness. For decades, the U.S. has used fertilizer exports as leverage, a subtle form of control. They'd offer aid, but that aid came with conditions. Buy American fertilizer, use American seeds, adopt American best practices. In other words, dependence disguised as development. But now, that model is collapsing. From Burkina Faso to Kenya, farmers are shifting gears. They're rediscovering something that has been hidden under layers of dependency: the power of organic soil regeneration. In Mali, researchers are developing biofertilizers made from baobab and neem tree extracts. In Ghana, youth cooperatives are building compost factories powered by renewable energy. And in Rwanda, local farmers have begun exporting their own biofertilizer brands to neighboring countries, a first in Africa's modern history. The message is clear: Africa doesn't need the West's chemicals to grow its future. It needs freedom from the West's dependency systems. And that's exactly what this fertilizer ban symbolizes: the soil rebellion of the century. Here's what Washington won't tell you. The U.S. fertilizer giants aren't just losing profits, they're losing data. See, in recent years, fertilizer companies started collecting digital information about African farms. Through apps, soil testing kits, and drone programs labeled as assistants, they mapped millions of acres of African farmland right down to nutrient composition and seasonal yields. That data was sent straight to corporate servers in the U.S. Now imagine the strategic power that holds, controlling not just what Africa grows, but how much it can grow. That is why the fertilizer ban isn't only economic, it's a security measure. African leaders are finally realizing whoever controls the soil controls the nation, and for too long, that control wasn't in African hands. This move by Africa has already started shaking global markets. American stock analysts are warning investors that emerging market fertilizer demand is declining at alarming rates. Translation: Africa is no longer buying. Countries like Ethiopia are doubling down on locally made phosphate fertilizers. Nigeria just commissioned a massive urea plant under the Dangote Group, capable of supplying most of West Africa and South Africa. It's now testing indigenous microbial fertilizers that could replace U.S. imports completely within 5 years. Even smaller nations like Benin and Malawi are turning inward, creating what experts now call the Green Sovereignty Network, a continental initiative to link African-made fertilizers, seeds, and irrigation systems. In essence, Africa is building an agricultural defense line, not with guns, but with compost, microbes, and independence. Of course, Washington isn't sitting idle. Washington's agriculture lobby is pushing the White House to protect market access in Africa. Some officials are even suggesting sanctions or trade barriers against nations that unfairly restrict imports. But can you sanction a continent that's simply choosing to grow differently? At the grassroots level, this ban has become more than policy, it's becoming a movement. African farmers, activists, and even urban youth collectives are uniting under one banner: our soil, our future. In Burkina Faso, community radio stations broadcast daily updates on soil restoration. In Tanzania, school programs are teaching children to make compost from kitchen waste. And across West Africa, farmers are proudly labeling their produce with stickers that read, "Grown without foreign fertilizer." The pride is palpable. For the first time in generations, African farmers are not just producers, they're protectors of their land. Analysts in Europe are calling it the fertilizer shock. This isn't just Africa saying no to America's fertilizers, it's Africa saying yes to sovereignty. So what is Washington hiding? It's hiding the fear that Africa's agricultural independence could inspire others: Latin America, Asia, even small U.S. farmers trapped under corporate control. It's hiding the panic that Africa might actually feed itself without American help. And it's hiding the truth that for the first time in modern history, Africa holds the leverage. Because the power of the future isn't in oil, gold, or rare minerals, it's in the soil beneath Africa's feet. And this time, that soil belongs to the people who live on it. This is a Frick Vibe News, where we tell Africa's story from Africa's voice. Stay tuned because the ground is shifting and Washington's secrets are finally coming to light. In Washington's corridors of power, a quiet storm is brewing. Behind the polished walls of American institutions, meetings are happening daily, not to help African farmers, but to regain control over a continent that's slipping from their grip. The goal? To keep the same Western fertilizer formulas entering African markets, just under new names. Now they're called bio-soil enhancers, micronutrient solutions, and growth catalysts. Different labels, same dependency. But this time, Africa saw it coming. Across the continent, nations are pioneering a new agricultural revolution built on self-reliance and innovation. Local scientists, cooperatives, and community farmers are transforming waste, animal manure, volcanic ash, and natural minerals into powerful organic fertilizers. And here's the game changer. African nations are funding themselves. No World Bank signatures, no US aid oversight, no hidden contracts. From the Sahel to East Africa, local soil research networks are emerging, sharing microbial data, organic enzyme technology, and indigenous knowledge that's been ignored for decades. In East Africa, national soil regeneration programs are already training hundreds of thousands of farmers in compost science and microbial farming. The goal? To end foreign fertilizer imports within 5 years and turn Africa into an exporter of biofertilizers to the world. Their slogan says it all. From the earth, for the earth, Africa feeds itself. But Washington's influence doesn't fade quietly. Suddenly, major U.S. media outlets have begun publishing alarming reports warning that Africa risks famine without modern fertilizers. Sound familiar? It's the same fear campaign used decades ago when nations tried to nationalize their oil, their gold, their banks. First comes the warning, then comes the pressure. American analysts are calling Africa's move dangerous and anti-progress. But what they won't admit is this. In 2024, U.S. fertilizer corporations made over $34 billion in global profits, and Africa contributed nearly 20% of that growth. So of course, Washington is panicking. Losing Africa's agricultural market isn't just an economic setback, it's a strategic wound. Meanwhile, across African social media, a different story is trending. Hashtags like #OurSoilOurFuture and #NoMoreImports are dominating timelines. Farmers are proudly showcasing their chemical-free harvest slush crops grown from local fertilizers, proving that African soil can thrive without foreign additives. And the world is watching. Washington's narrative is collapsing not through speeches but through results. Yet the plot thickens. Europe isn't standing idle either. While the US scrambles to reassert control, European powers are pivoting. France, Germany, and the Netherlands are quietly sending delegations, seeking partnerships with African eco-fertilizer startups. But this time, Africa is not desperate for validation. The terms have changed. African economists and ministers now demand that any foreign partnership must guarantee majority African ownership, technology transfer, and regional export rights. It's no longer about selling resources, it's about building industries. Across the Sahel and beyond, a new political doctrine is taking root: agricultural sovereignty equals national security. It's the same spirit that led African nations to reclaim their minerals, their airspace, and their currencies. Now they're reclaiming their soil. Parliaments across West and Central Africa are revisiting old fertilizer contracts tied to Western lobbyists. Civil society movements are rising, demanding transparency and accountability. Youth organizations are marching with banners that read, "We will not eat from poisoned soil," and this isn't just protest, it's awakening. Because Africans are beginning to understand that controlling food production isn't just about survival, it's about freedom. But Washington has one last card to play. As African nations distance themselves from chemical imports, the U.S. is quietly activating its oldest tools, the IMF and the World Bank. Suddenly, those same institutions are warning that countries who disrupt established agricultural chains could face credit downgrades. Translation: obey the old system or pay the price. Some African officials have even received friendly reminders that declining sustainable subsidy packages could affect access to foreign loans. But this time, the response is different. African leaders are standing their ground. One minister put it simply, "We'd rather grow from poor soil that is ours than from rich soil that belongs to another." That statement has become a rallying cry, spreading from farms to universities, from city streets to presidential offices. It symbolizes a generation that refuses to trade sovereignty for convenience. Because this battle isn't just about fertilizer, it's about freedom. It's about the right to plant, grow, and harvest without permission. From the rice fields of Sierra Leone to the maize farms of Tanzania, a continental declaration is taking root. We will make our own fertilizers, we will feed our own people, we will own our own future. And for the first time in modern history, Washington can't stop it. Because this isn't just about agriculture, it's about power, control, and the birth of a new African century. Let us start with a confidential report leaked from a major African ministry verified by independent sources. It details how for years U.S. fertilizer companies like Mosaic and CF Industries didn't just sell fertilizers, they signed strategic supply contracts that quietly gave them access to national soil data, crop yield patterns, and even agricultural satellite imagery. Buried deep in the fine print were clauses allowing these companies to recommend planting cycles, influence government fertilizer subsidies, and adjust pricing during global crises. In short, they didn't just sell the product, they controlled the process. Washington called it agricultural modernization, but African analysts now call it what it truly was: agricultural colonization 2.0. Now, here's where the story takes a chilling turn. Multiple African environmental agencies have begun testing leftover batches of imported fertilizers, and what they've found is raising eyebrows. Certain chemicals, labeled as yield enhancers, were actually linked to soil sterilization compounds used in industrial agriculture to limit non-commercial seed growth. That means some imported fertilizers were designed to make local, non-GMO seeds struggle to survive, forcing farmers to rely on patented foreign seeds that work only with those fertilizers. If that sounds like a conspiracy, think again. A 2023 report by an independent research group in Uganda titled Seeds of Dependency documented these exact patterns, showing how certain American agrochemicals were subtly designed to erase Africa's indigenous crop resilience. Washington's silence on the report? Deafening, because admitting it would mean admitting that for decades, what was called aid was actually agricultural warfare. Now let's follow the digital trail, the one Washington doesn't want Africa to trace. Every time U.S. fertilizer companies supplied smart farming kits, those kits came with sensors, mobile apps, and data collection software. Farmers thought they were simply tracking soil pH and moisture. But the information didn't stay in Africa. It was transmitted quietly to cloud servers owned by foreign corporations. By 2024, over 60 million hectares of African farmland had been digitally mapped and monitored by U.S. agritech systems. This gave Washington's agencies a near-complete digital model of Africa's agricultural potential, a strategic resource as valuable as oil or gold. Why does this matter? Because whoever owns the data owns the decision-making power. If Africa's soil patterns, rainfall projections, and crop cycles are controlled elsewhere, then Africa's agricultural future isn't sovereign, it's rented. That's why this ban isn't just economic, it's a digital liberation. Washington's fear isn't only about fertilizer profits, it's about influence. Food is power. For decades, American aid agencies used food programs to gain political leverage. Countries that aligned with U.S. policies got cheap grain and fertilizer deals. Those who didn't face shortages, the U.S. called it foreign assistance, but behind closed doors, officials called it strategic food diplomacy. Now imagine what happens when Africa, the world's fastest growing food producer, no longer depends on American supplies. It changes everything, it shifts global power, and it terrifies Washington. That's why African nations like Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Nigeria have suddenly faced increased scrutiny over trade transparency and climate compliance. It's not about transparency, it's about control. Meanwhile, on the African side, something historic is forming: a coalition quietly being called the African Fertilizer Bloc (AF). Led by Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Kenya, and Ghana, this bloc's goal is simple but revolutionary: to ensure every African nation can produce, process, and profit from its own soil. Under the AF plan, each sub-region will host one large-scale organic fertilizer plant. Local universities will train soil engineers, not just agronomists. A digital platform will connect all African fertilizer producers, removing middlemen forever. And here's the part Washington didn't expect. China, India, and Brazil are lining up to partner with the AF, offering technology swaps instead of loans. This alliance isn't anti-America, it's pro-independence. But in Washington's eyes, any move away from dependence is seen as rebellion. There's one more secret hidden under all of this, the environmental one. When African scientists studied regions heavily dependent on imported fertilizers, they found alarming levels of nitrate contamination in groundwater, soil acidification, and loss of native plant species. Entire ecosystems were quietly dying, yet these same areas were listed in U.S. reports as model agricultural zones. Why? Because yield numbers looked good on paper, but on the ground farmers were watching their soil turn gray, dry, and lifeless. So, while Washington's PR claimed to be feeding Africa, the reality was that they were bleeding its land dry, one harvest at a time. The new African fertilizer revolution isn't just about sovereignty, it's about saving the soil itself before it collapses beyond recovery. Here's something that slipped past the global radar: the U.S. Fertilizer Export Council spends millions lobbying African politicians every year. Some of these funds are disguised as training grants, agricultural symposiums, and capacity-building programs. In reality, they're soft influence campaigns, whispers in parliament, trips to Washington, partnership dinners. But with Africa's new generation of transparent, youth-driven leadership, those tactics are failing fast. A young Tanzanian MP put it bluntly in a viral interview: they can keep their fertilizer and their fake friendships. Africa has its own roots now, so what exactly is Washington hiding? It's not just about fertilizer, it's the realization that Africa is rewriting the rulebook of global agriculture, and the West no longer gets to hold the pen. Africa's soil is no longer a test field, it's a battlefield for sovereignty, and this time it's not weapons that will decide the victor, it's wisdom. As one farmer said during a recent rally, "They thought they could own our harvest, but they forgot the soil remembers who it belongs to." That quote says it all. The age of foreign-controlled food empires is ending, the age of African-grown freedom is beginning, and that family is the truth Washington didn't want the world to know. Africa's fertilizer ban isn't isolationism. It's resurrection. It's the rebirth of confidence, culture, and control rooted in the very ground our ancestors walked. This is more than news, it's a movement. Stay tuned for Part 4, where we'll explore how this agricultural revolution is inspiring Latin America and Asia to follow Africa's path, and why this could mark the end of Western dominance over global food systems. Because once again, the story begins in Africa and the world follows. This is a Frick Vibe News. The soil is speaking, and this time the world is finally listening.